it goes right, it's a slice. If it goes left, it's a hook. If it goes straight, it's a miracle. This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Out of Bounds. Today is all about getting you caught up at this really consequential moment in the professional golf season. All four majors are behind us. We are about to begin the Olympics, and the FedEx Cup playoffs are just a few weeks away. Let's get into it, Nate, and start with Royal Troon. Xander Schauffele gets his second career major, shutting down the post-PGA Championship debate. You know, we didn't talk much immediately after the Open, but man, he got it done in a big way. There wasn't any backing into this win. He went out and took it.
No, definitely not, Josh. It looked like we needed somebody to come out and get it, right? It was an interesting Sunday with a jumbled up leaderboard, and Xander did just that. She shoots 65 on the day, 31 on the back nine, Josh, which is just incredible. You had players like Scottie Scheffler and some other guys come out and say maybe the hardest 9 holes of golf they've ever played on that back nine. And It was a lot less windy and there's no rain on Sunday compared to some of those other days. But Josh, it really is a tough 9 holes of golf. And, you know, we like to poke fun at Xander, you know, these last few years where can he win the big tournament? Can he win the big spot? He does it at Valhalla. And we say, well, Josh, this is such an easy course that there's a lot of birdies out there. That's why Xander won. And that was the caveat we found, right? And then he goes and does it on an open championship golf course, which is a very challenging golf course. And he totally slams the door on that narrative. Now there is nothing anybody can say about Xander Schauffele and about his style of play and his game that can ridicule him into not being one of the best golfers in the world.
Objectively. And you know, it kind of in hindsight for me just becomes a little annoying because it feels like a golf fan problem. Like they don't just want you to go out and win the golf tournament. They want you to win it a certain way or under certain circumstances. Otherwise it'll get criticized. Like scoring was too high at the PGA. Oh, it was too high at the PGA. So there's a little asterisk next to it. And then this one, you know, had the leaders all fallen back and Xander not gone out and won the damn thing like he did, you know, it would have been the same conversation, right? That's what I was thinking. But so really happy to see him get it done and just, you know, do it. Now the comparisons will be between he and Bryson DeChambeau and Scottie Scheffler about who is the best golfer right now. I think it's still, to me, it still leans towards Scottie Scheffler, but you know, he's put himself in a really good spot, especially as we move forward through the rest of the season. When you look at the list of runner-ups, close calls, there were so many of them, especially on Sunday. It really felt like it could have been anybody's tournament for the first, you know, 7 or 8 holes of the day before Xander really started to establish himself. What was standing out to you as you were watching it throughout the day in terms of what some of those stories could have been?
I was really looking at Billy Horschel. You know, he held the 36-hole lead. You know, he had that kind of really good play, especially on that rainy day. I believe it was Friday, where he had the short sleeve shirts on when everyone was wearing, you know, the long pants and long shirts and stuff. But just fun to watch a guy like Billy Horschel. And you know, I thought it was really going to be really good for Billy because, you know, his career is sort of, I don't know if missing is the right word, Josh, but kind of lacking that big win, right? And I think this stamps his career if he were to win a major as a really good golf career. And Josh, I don't know if he's going to have another golden chance like this to get that illustrious first major for a guy like Billy Horschel. And I don't think he necessarily played too bad on Sunday, but he certainly didn't play that good. So you need to put 4 rounds of good golf together, especially when a guy like Xander Schauffele shoots 65 on Sunday. It's really hard. But yeah, Billy Horschel is the guy I was watching for sure to hopefully get that win for himself. He didn't get it. But it's hard not to root for a guy like Billy Horschel. He's one of the best to root for.
Yeah, I kind of had for me, it was 2 buckets of close calls and really cool stories. The first one had Thurston Lawrence and Daniel Brown in it. Obviously, Daniel Brown wasn't as in the mix to necessarily win as Thurston Lawrence was on Sunday, but they were both there most of the entire week. And just a good story. I feel like every major you need like your unknown commodity to be the storyline, especially on the weekend. And it was. And you know what? Like, talking about Justin Rose and Billy Horschel, to me, these felt like legacy events.
Definitely.
Okay, they didn't win, may not have won. And wins would have been immense for both of them, for many of the reasons you just mentioned for Billy Horschel, even more so for Justin Rose, who already has a major. But being in these events the way they were, completely unexpected, I think is really consequential for their golf career story too. Like, Justin Rose, T6 at the PGA, T2 at the Open after having to qualify. He had to qualify. He's ranked 34th in the world now. And if you go back to his prime, he was competing and winning events, because a lot of people are going to look at the last 4 or 5, 6 years and say, well, he hasn't really done that much. When he was in his prime and he was winning events, he was competing against prime Tiger Woods. And that is, when you're talking about his career, you aren't going to be able to talk about Justin Rose's career without also talking about the fact that he did what he did during the Tiger era. And, I just think that counts a little more. And, to that end, I said it a couple weeks ago. I think I said it a few times before the US Open. We need to get these guys in all of the majors. Future Hall of Famer. We need to get these guys in all of the majors. I don't care if some people are going to say, oh, it waters down the field or does this, does that. These are the guys who have carried professional golf for the better part of 20 plus years alongside guys like Tiger Woods. They're names that fans recognize. You need to get them in these events because they do things like this. Justin Rose, obviously not a hack. He can play golf.
Yeah, Josh, and it's especially true to me at the Open Championship because Justin Rose is that stamped European, right? He plays well in the Open a lot. He played very well in the Ryder Cup. I would say he's probably a future European Ryder Cup captain, right? So, I mean, he's this guy that comes from Europe, right? And he's this, you think about European golf, Justin Rose is one of the top golfers you think about, right? And I think until Justin Rose doesn't want to play, he's 42, until he can continue playing in this Open Championship. We've seen really old players succeed in the Open Championship, right? So maybe not more so. I don't agree more so with the other majors, maybe, Josh, but I think the Open Championship, as long as Justin Rose wants to play, open the doors, roll out the red carpet for him and let him play because he could win it in 10 years and no one would be surprised at all.
What'd you make of Jon Rahm's Sunday? He was 4 under on the front. Looked like he was going to really make a charge there coming down the back 9. Bogeys 11 and then just pars out. What were when you were watching him charge and then kind of just fall off there, what were you thinking?
I think it proves even more and shows even better how Xander's incredible 31 on the back was. Because that back 9, Josh, is very, very challenging. Even though it wasn't super windy and the conditions weren't that bad on Sunday, one of the better golfers we've seen in the last few years, maybe not this year, Jon Rahm was struggling on it, making a lot of pars, and he hit it out of bounds hit it out of play, and I think unplayable one time. And it just goes to show how difficult this is. And Xander, went out and shot 31 on the back 9 with the pressure of the lead and the pressure of contending at a major championship. To me, Josh, that just goes to show how much more big it is for Xander, and for John, to struggle on that back 9, it is kind of tough. But watching that, you kind of saw where that could sort of happen with John. He wasn't going to shoot another 4 or 5 under on the back 9, right? That's just unrealistic to kind of think about that. But it's pretty cool to see him, get his name in there. We've seen John really struggle this year in the majors, had to pull out of the US Open, right, with that foot injury. And just keep going too. So good to see him on the first page of the leaderboard at the end of the day. But Josh, that back 9 is just so challenging.
Definitely is. Really, frankly, the entire golf course is. First 2 days were tough for a lot of different reasons. And there were some very big names that missed the cut. Will Zalatoris, Tommy Fleetwood, Ludwig Aberg, Bryson DeChambeau, Tony Finau, Victor Hovland, Cam Smith, Rory McIlroy, Tom Kim, Sahith Theegala, who I believe you had. Did you kind of have him in the discussion of potentially winning?
Oh yeah, my bets were just awful this week, Josh. I always struggle at the Open. I had Rory McIlroy outright to win, which we can talk about his kind of story. He was never even close. I had Cameron Smith in my make the cut parlay, and Sahith Theegala also in my make the cut parlay. They weren't even really close to making the cut. So no. Josh, before I even woke up on Thursday, before we woke up here on the East Coast, my bets were dead. So that's just kind of how it goes, right?
Yeah, and then you mentioned it, Wyndham Clark also missed the cut. And by the way, those last, I'll say half dozen names or so, Victor Hovland, Cam Smith, Rory McIlroy, Tom Kim, Sahith Theegala, Wyndham Clark, they missed the cut by a mile. They weren't close.
Yeah.
Out of those names, I want a biggest surprise and one that you just weren't surprised about.
Biggest surprise for me is Rory. I expected him to play very well. I talked about it on this podcast. Like I said, I bet him outright to win the event. Had that brutal finish at the U.S. Open, then took some time off, played decently well at the Scottish, not super well. And then going back, to Scotland and playing this week, I just thought it was a shoo-in for Rory to compete. He's played very good golf this year. So that was shocking to me that Rory was never even close to the cut line. And one that you kind of knew was going to happen. I think, I hate to say it, but I think it's Tiger Woods, right, Josh? He really did struggle those 2 days. And just to me, Josh, I think the Open Championship is the one I think Tiger might struggle in the most, just because of the unknown in the weather forecast, right? For Tiger, it needs to be almost 85, 90 degrees and for his body to sort of, I don't know if the right word, could just kind of compare with
Work
himself,
properly.
to work properly. Thank you. We
Right.
need that. He needs that hot and needs to be engaged in order for him to compete, right? And when the wind's blowing sideways and it's raining, I don't think Tiger is ever going to be able to compete. You can combat that by saying the Open Championship is quote unquote gets the most random and older winners, right? We see guys like Justin Rose compete and Shane Lowry compete, or maybe not Shane Lowry, but getting towards their end of their careers, right? Compete in the Open Championship. But Josh, just the weather just changes things for Tiger Woods. So I think that was, I hate to say it, but that was sort of my most expected one. Josh, who are you looking at to be most surprising as we continue on towards the end of this golf season?
So I guess for me, it was my biggest surprise was Ludwig, actually, because, and maybe not because of the outcome, but because of the theme that I feel like we're starting to see develop with him. He's starting to show some cracks in the armor, so to speak. And he's in the bigger moments, it feels like he's having trouble. And I don't know if that's, we had heard reports, CBS had reported earlier in the major calendar that, he was having some trouble with his knee, partially torn meniscus maybe, or something along those lines. Like if there's a knee injury that's making things difficult for him to operate at this point, that could explain it. But he had that bad Saturday. It was a span of basically 3 holes at the PGA that took him out of the tournament after he looked like he was in a position where he could have taken control, and then to just not even really be in the mix after a couple other tournaments since between where, we thought he had an opportunity to reassert himself. He just didn't. And then to just flame out and out of the equation completely. It was really surprising to me. So that one, for all we've talked about him, was the most surprising to me. The one that was no surprise is Wyndham Clark. I'm sorry, but he just hasn't shown up in majors. He's had some okay finishes on the tour this year, but his only win this year is at a shortened AT&T. His top 3s are at the AP, the Players, and the RBC Heritage. But since the Masters, he's missed 4 cuts, and we're going to talk about him again as we come up here talking about the Olympics. But and I talked about it on TikTok this past weekend. I just can't think of a player who I have seen in the last, I don't know, half dozen years or so that has exploded in such a way, won such consequential golf tournaments, made such an impact, and then disappeared into the abyss so quickly. And honestly, I think this new point system that the tour uses with elevated events and signature events not having a cut and more points being accounted for, I think it's really allowed, frankly, Wyndham to not fall further, because he just has been in such a strange place, his golf game, that is. When I saw that he missed the cut by a long ways, just wasn't surprised by it. So those were the two for me. Going back to what you mentioned about Rory, I'm curious, what'd you make of his comments talking about, so before the tournament started, he was talking about how he needed to have more fun, that he needed to enjoy himself in life more. And some people took that as maybe that was a good sign that he was going to be in a better headspace. But then, after Friday, he was talking about how about 4 holes in, 22 holes into the tournament, he was more or less checked out thinking about where he was going to be on vacation next week. What do you make of that?
I think, we've seen this from Rory the last few years. He came out and said before in press conferences, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but, if I don't win another golf tournament again, I'll be very happy with my life. He said stuff like that. And he's talked about how he is off the golf course, and that's more important than golf. So we know where Rory is and where his values lie. And that, I think that's a good thing, Josh, right? Kind of going towards and looking at your life. He's gone through this divorce this year, right? Where it's been, back and forth on whether it's on and whether it's off, right? We've seen that the last few months, right? So I think Rory's got a lot going on in his personal life. Last year we saw a whole battle with the PGA Tour, and Josh, he's taken sort of a backseat to that, but he's still involved. You can't tell me that Rory McIlroy is not still involved and they're not still asking him questions. He may not be, on the board of talking about what's going to happen, but Josh, he's still being talked about in backdoor meetings, right? He's still being, being the face of it, right? In terms of that. So I think there's still a little bit going on with Rory, and I think it's still getting better, but that US Open loss, Josh, is just so hard to get over. And I think might take him some time. I mean, I could be totally wrong. He could rip it up in the Olympics in 2 weeks and just show everybody that we're wrong. So who knows with that, but I really expected Rory to have a better week this week. I thought all the signs pointed towards him in my mind.
I'm glad you brought up him having, because this feels like a theme now. When the golf world becomes disappointed in how Rory plays, we hear him say the same things. Like, I don't care if I win another golf tournament ever again. I'll still be happy with my life. Then this past week, he says, I think I need to enjoy life a little more. I think I need to me, those two things together and hearing the kind of repeating the same thing over and over again, it almost as if he's trying to convince himself that he doesn't care when he does care, or that like the rubber can't meet the road with him actually like putting it into action in terms of not caring. And I feel like that's really hard for a guy like Rory because, if you didn't care, you would have stuck around after the US Open and you would have faced the media and you would have gone through the whole process and you would have said, it stinks. But, I think about, especially now that Xander has 2 big wins under his belt, all the times that even this year that he faced the music after coming up short. I think it was the Players where he just straight up said, this feeling sucks. And it was like a piece of honesty that you just appreciate. And I think if you truly are comfortable with not winning another event the rest of your professional career, you're comfortable sitting in that spot and saying it. But I think it's something that he's actively been working on while, as you said, dealing with all of the other things that he's had to deal with. I don't think he's really in the backseat on this PGA Tour Live PIF stuff. I think he's very much in the front seat with Tiger and Patrick Cantlay and the other guys that are basically leading the charge here. So, it's a lot. I agree. I hope for his sake that he does get to a point where he is more at peace with things, because he's saying it, but I don't really think anybody believes it if you really take stock of all of the things that he's saying week in and week out.
Yeah, Josh. And I think, being able to say conflicting things is okay. Being able to kind of go back on what you said and be, sometimes we say the wrong thing, right? And not say something we're thinking about, or we say something rash, right? And I think that's certainly something more heightened in professional golf, with men's mental health being on the forefront, right? We, past the passing of Grayson Murray not too long ago, and just being able to make sure we're, as a human, we're okay before we figure out what we're doing on the golf course, right? So I think some of Rory's comments are very interesting and they can go to that, but he's got to figure that part out first, right? I think before you can get to that golf side, he's got to figure that personal life stuff out too, which he's going through so much. But I think he's such a good player, Josh, that at the end of the day, if Rory McIlroy has these struggles off the golf course, he's still going to win one of these big tournaments by the end of his career. I mean, he's too good not to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't, that's the thing. Even with all of this, I still have no doubt that he's going to win. I don't know. We'll call them signature events. He's probably going to win a half dozen to 8 or 10 more signature events before the end of his career. And he's probably going to win 1 to 3 more majors. He's not 45 years old. He's not washed. He's, you know, at worst, the 4th best golfer on planet Earth. Right? Like,
yeah. And it's not like he has it. It's not like he hasn't played good either, Josh. He's played very well. He's won this year, won an elevated event at the Wells Fargo, and he's played other times very good too. So we saw the US Open, he played very well there, just came up short. So it's just it's not a playing bad problem for Rory McIlroy. Yeah,
it's just the expectations are unusually high for him, and he is later in his career than say a Scottie Scheffler. So, you know, the time element is more of a real thing. Let's review these majors. Who had the best? Who had the worst major year? Just taking the 4 majors into account, forget about live, forget about signature, non-signature, all that stuff. Who do you got?
So, Josh, I think there's 2 obvious choices, right, between Scottie and Xander. And coming up to this event, Josh, it was Scottie Scheffler's having a historic year. You know, he's won 6 times on tour. He's made every cut. He's got 15 top 10s. He's first on the FedEx Cup by a good margin, right? And then Xander wins another major, and he's won 2 majors this year. Those are his 2 wins. He's also made every cut and been in the top 25 of every event except for 1, just like Scottie. And Josh, wow, this is a very interesting conversation. And I had fun talking about this on our socials yesterday. But Josh, I think at the end of the day, I think Scottie Scheffler has still had the better statistical season, right? And I think we've talked about him having this historic year and, you know, matching some of the things Tiger did and doing some things that Tiger didn't even do, which is crazy too. But I think if you were to ask Scottie, and Scottie had the lie detector test on, right, and he's talking about it, if he could switch seasons with Xander Schauffele right now, I think he does it. Because Josh, at the end of the day, I think it's definitely more for your legacy, right? When people look back at your career, it's going to matter how many elevated events you won, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't, especially in an era where the best players, i.e. Bryson DeChambeau, all these other guys aren't even playing on the PGA Tour. So what do these wins even mean? I don't want to say there's an asterisk next to them, but there is a little bit of an asterisk next to them. But these major championships, there's not. And so I think at the end of the day, Xander winning his 2nd major really solidifies his career. And I think he might have had a better year so far than Scottie Scheffler. And the year's not over yet. We still have a lot of big events to happen. So what do you think?
I think the one reason maybe why Xander wouldn't, or why Scottie wouldn't necessarily care to swap with Xander, is because of the age gap. Xander is, 30, 31 years old. Scottie is 27, 28 years old. So,
maybe
he's
younger,
got,
maybe, yeah.
Yeah. And also, by the way, as great as Xander has played, we have now seen a sustained level of performance across from tee to green out of Scottie Scheffler for the last 2 years now that we haven't seen in golf since Tiger. So I don't necessarily, if we're just comparing resumes, I think it easily goes to Xander for best major year.
Just doing blind resumes. Yep.
To go from no majors to 2 majors in 2.5 months ish, it's incredible. And when you look at the rest of his career, you can talk about Scottie Scheffler's consistency and elevated performance over the last 2 years, but you really start to appreciate with Xander's age and his consistency since going pro. 62 top 10 finishes out of 180 starts, 157 cuts made, just 23 missed cuts in his entire career. And 60%, 62 top 10s and 180 starts. 60% of his finishes this year have been top 10s. I mean, it's really, really impressive to see how well he has performed, despite the fact that he has come up short on paper in some of the biggest moments, but that's changed now. And, you win 2 majors, you get the award for best major year. It ain't close.
And what's so cool to me
your
about,
worst though?
oh, sorry. The worst year? Oh man, I think it might be Koepka. And I don't know if we're talking about the PGA Tour, if we're talking about all golfers, right? I think, Brooks coming off that major last year at Oak Hill and Rochester, I think maybe not the whole world, but certainly me, I expected him to possibly contend for one, and he didn't really this year. I mean, last year he was incredible. He almost won the Masters, and then he won the PGA. And this year he kind of flailed in the majors. So I think it's kind of an interesting year for Koepka. He's certainly not getting any younger, and just trying to figure out where he's going to go in his career in terms of the majors, which he cares about so much, is interesting to me. Josh, do you have one?
I think it's Jon Rahm, only because I had such high expectations for him. Like, I really wanted to see this Rahm versus Scheffler thing come to fruition. With Rahm going to live, I didn't really, after he settled over there, I didn't have any real issue with it. He took the money, but, throughout this entire season, I know he's second in points or whatever, however they're calculating over there, but he's never really looked in form or totally comfortable or totally happy over there. And he just hasn't played that well in majors. Obviously, he did okay this past weekend, but, we really expected him to be in the mix in terms of, top 2 or 3 or 4 favored every single major. And that just wasn't the case at all. So, I think that he's the most disappointing because I would have put him a little ahead of Brooks Koepka coming into the season. So, that's where I sit with it.
Josh, before we move on, I got one more thing about Xander. It's just so interesting to me how much his game has changed, right? Because Xander Schauffele used to be a guy that didn't hit it super long off the tee, and now Josh, he's one of the top guys in driving. I mean, we hear it week in and week out when Xander's competing that this guy is sneaky long. Josh, I don't think he's sneaky long anymore. He's just plain long. I mean, Xander Schauffele has increased his ball speed like crazy. I mean, he's often in the 180 for ball speed, which is something we didn't see from Xander in the past. And now he's just there, and a very straight driver of the golf ball too. Josh, he's changed his aspect of driving totally on its head, right? He was never the long player. He was never that, but he is now. And Josh, it's helped him like crazy. We saw him in Valhalla. He played from the fairway almost every hole, it felt like. And we saw it at the Open Championship too, which there's a little bit more variability with driving stats, right? You don't need to be the best driver in the world to win at the Open Championship year in and year out. But Josh, it's just totally changed his game because he's able to be lethal with wedges because he's so much closer than he was at the end of the day, right? So Josh, it's been just cool to watch Xander Schauffele and how much he's changed his game over the last year, or even more.
Absolutely. So before we get into the Olympics and the FedEx Cup playoffs, is there anything else that you want to touch on that's happened previous in the season that we haven't touched on yet today?
I don't think so, Josh. I'm just really excited for the Olympics next week to watch and continue to how this Xander versus Scottie sort of year ends up, because we have the Olympics and then we have the FedEx Cup playoff events. Let's buckle in.
Yeah. So let's get into it. Olympic preview. I need you to talk me into this because I'm feeling kind of lost. I don't really know what to expect. You mentioned just a minute ago, Rory McIlroy, he could come out and play incredibly well, but he's on vacation this week. So I don't necessarily know what kind of form he's going to be coming back in with. When you look at the Olympics, what are you watching for, and what are your expectations for players and how they perform in Paris?
I think it's definitely interesting, right, Josh? Because you have some of these European guys that are playing that just played in the Open who are staying over there, right? Of course, and playing in the Olympics next week. Josh, I think I'm looking at some of these U.S. guys the most, right? Just being from the U.S. too. We're looking at Wyndham Clark and see what he does. We could talk all this stuff about Wyndham Clark and how he's played really bad, but he could put up a really good number at the Olympics, and that's how funny golf is, Josh. I think we were talking about that before we got on, about how golf can surprise you, and It doesn't matter where you are in your game, you can play your best. So, Josh, I think that's interesting. And then Xander Schauffele, I'm really, really watching hard because 4 years ago he won this event. And, Josh, you can argue that he's a better golfer than he was 4 years ago. and he's got these major wins. He's shown that to himself, and he's shown to the world that he can compete on the largest stages week in and week out, right? He's done it twice this year. So I wouldn't put it past me if Xander goes and wins this golf tournament, and then he really gets himself in the driver's seat in that whole Xander Scottie situation. What about you?
Yeah, I want to take a break from bashing Wyndham Clark, because I think I truly hope as an American that he comes out and plays really well and shuts people like me up. And
Right.
the conversation isn't so much about, oh, Wyndham Clark really didn't perform that well and Bryson should have been on the team, because that is essentially what we'll be talking about next week, if that plays out. I'm curious to see. I'm watching Scottie the most, I think, because we've talked a lot about, what his season has lacked. I think an Olympic win would make up for not winning a second major. What do you think?
I think it certainly adds, at the end of the day, it adds something to his resume that he doesn't have, right? We've seen him win two major championships already, both Masters. He's probably, I would say, if I was a betting man, which I am, he's going to win some of the other ones, and he's going to win a good amount of them, right? So I think the Olympics only comes four times or once every 4 years. So Josh, being able to say you're a gold medal champion or you're silver medalist at the Olympics is even cooler in some aspects. We look at a lot of sports and that don't have these big major championship like golf does. We look at like swimming and how it's really divided by the gold medals you won or the medals you won at the Olympics. So Josh, I think it certainly is something different. And we talk about how there already is, something, between your country with the Ryder Cup. But Josh, this is a team championship right in the Olympics, but at the end of the day, it's an individual game. There's no team aspect at the Olympics. Yeah. So I think it's very cool to see how these guys really gear up for this event, and how, being relatively new in the Olympics the last few years, it really does mean a lot to them.
Yeah, I you know what? And my last thought on the Olympics coming into it isn't even about this week. It's about the next Olympics. I just hope we have trials or a play-in or some kind of qualifying system that doesn't use OWGR and doesn't rely on things that don't work because of this separated golf world that we now live in. That's all.
Yeah, Josh, I think they'll figure it out. Bryson DeChambeau sitting on the sidelines not playing the Olympics is just insane.
Crazy.
I don't understand how Bryson's one of the most electric golfers in the world. I mean, he's got a video coming out with the president-elect Donald Trump coming out pretty soon. So, he's a crowd pleaser, right? And a guy that needs to be there in every high-profile event for the sake of golf, Josh, and for the sake of entertainment. I think for both things.
Yeah. And then once the Olympics wraps, we will be quickly moving into FedEx Cup playoffs. Going through the list of guys that are kind of getting close to that 70 mark. Minwoo Lee, Jordan Spieth, it looks like they are going to need strong finishes coming down the stretch. Personally, I feel like Patrick Cantlay needs to make a run to salvage something of this season. He's in the middle in terms of points, so he's not gone per se, but Patrick Cantlay really needs to show something. I'm watching Shane Lowry because, we talked about it before we came on. If he were to somehow, he is currently sitting 10th in FedEx Cup points. If he were to somehow win the playoffs, it would be an absolutely absurd story. He didn't qualify for the first 3 signature events of the year. Needed a sponsor's exemption to get into the Arnold Palmer Invitational. And here he is, 10th in points. Crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
So when you look ahead to the playoffs, what stands out to you? Maybe not necessarily in the playoffs themselves, but who needs to have maybe one more strong event before the playoffs gets here?
I'm looking the most, I think, at Victor Hovland, Josh, and I think he's very interesting because he had this awful start to the year after last year winning the FedEx Cup and playing incredible in the fall, right? And we've seen Victor Hovland really stumble at the beginning of the year, and then maybe around the PGA, around the U.S. Open-ish, he kind of looked like he was sort of figuring out. He went back to that old coach, right, and sort of looked like he was finding his golf game, and then he misses the cut at the Open. So you're like, where is Victor Hovland, right? So I think, this really insane golfer that we've seen, we're going to see him at the Olympics, seeing where he is kind of in terms of this final stretches of the season, Josh, I think it's going to be really, really interesting and something I'm looking at the most, Victor Hovland, to kind of see where he finishes the year off at.
Yeah, agreed. Also, let's not overlook Lucas Glover in a familiar spot, 71 in the FedEx Cup points right now. Perhaps he can rekindle some of that magic, get into the playoffs. Might have to win, but we'll see. Hey, that is going to do it for this edition of Out of Bounds. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram for more this week. And remember, whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. See you next time on Out of Bounds.